All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. So excited to have you all here today. Really appreciate all the response we've had to this session. So I'm Scott Fiaschetti, as always, but before I introduce the panel, a few things I want to go over with today's session. So just want to give you all some background on this session and how it came to be and why we're doing this today. So we did this session at the conference in Nashville, and there was a really positive response to it. And I talked with Andrew, Piper, and Heather, and like, hey, it would be great to maybe do this for a larger group at as a webinar. And so they graciously agreed to do that. And so we're here with you today, and really want to make sure you have a great time with this session and have fun with it. So this is really a slightly different session than some of the ones we've done in the past. Before a couple housekeeping things I do want to talk about. So this will be recorded. We often get asked that question. And also, if you want to download the deck that we're going to go through, there's some certain slides I'm sure people might want to screenshot and things like that. So rather than having you have to do that, you can just maybe screenshot this and then use the QR code or use the link. Don't worry if you missed this. I'm going to have it again near the end of the session as well, so you can download this. And another thing is typically we don't always have the chat open, but this is a different kind of session. Like I said, we want you all to be sharing your thoughts, your experiences. Yes, we're a panel here and we're talking about some things specific to our experiences and how we go about thinking about these plans and using data, but we'd love it to be collaborative and everybody share. So feel free to, in the chat, share your thoughts, share your experiences, because that's what the session was really like, live and in person. And I know this is a slightly different dynamic with us being on a webinar, but I'd like to try to mimic that as much as possible. And then if you do have questions, all that we do is ask you is to put the questions in the Q&A widget, because it's going to be hard. Hopefully there's a lot of discussion in chat going on, but so we don't want to miss anybody's questions. So if you can put the questions in the Q&A widget, that would be great. Brian Shopper's here, as always, with me, my partner in crime, who's going to be monitoring questions and things like that, and we'll jump in with questions and stop us as we're going along. So without further ado, I want to welcome my awesome panel who's here again with me today. If I can get to that slide. Just want to have everybody just give a quick introduction of yourself. I think a lot of people on the calls today know you already, but it's always nice to give a quick intro and just talk about your thoughts on how you use data, and in particular how you use geopath data in your daily life, at work. Hopefully you're not using to use it at home, but
Thank you, Scott. Hi, I'm Heather Harder. I work for YESCO Outdoor Media. We're an out-of-home vendor with digital and static bulletins throughout the West. I use geopath and data on a daily basis. I develop proposals for ad agencies across the country. So it is integral to my daily activities.
Cool, thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Piper Wirth and I work at Rapport in the Los Angeles office, and I oversee all of the lines of Amazon business. So that's anything from Prime Video to web services to music. As you can imagine, a company like Amazon, they rely heavily on data and measurement. So we definitely are using data every day when we're planning for Amazon.
Cool.
Great. Hi, I'm Andrew Marcus. I head up the research and insights for ClearChannel Outdoor. And like Heather and Piper, we're using geopath data on a daily basis. We're constantly using Workspace and Explorer to look at inventory and different plans. And we consider Brian and Kevin, the entire geopath team, an extension of our research department. We count on them daily for auditing and help. And they've been great partners to us, and you too, Scott, as well.
Thank you. Cool. Thank you for that little bit. And I want to just give a little bit more about what we're going to cover today and kind of take you through the thought process here. So we're really going to frame this around a specific ask, like a client ask that we all hopefully kind of can relate to and may have received, maybe even received today, and just take that through the process, the planning, buying, and selling process, and understanding the questions that would be helpful to ask, or how do we tease out this question, this level of data, and then focusing on, you know, how audience data kind of plays a role within that, and how it can influence and impact the inventory you select and recommend. And then, you know, talk about metrics available and some guidance on some of those, some best practices there. And then even at the back end. So Geopath, obviously, we're doing audience measurement, but there's a lot of talk going on in the industry right now, really about post-campaign, you know, performance outcome measurement. And we want to give some guidance on that. It's not a space that we necessarily play in. But again, we wanted to make this session not even just only specifically about Geopath data. You'll see we'll give you some thoughts and resources beyond just Geopath that hopefully can inspire or kind of give you some new thoughts or ideas or new spaces to go to gather some info for yourself. And again, definitely feel in the chat, feel free to share your thoughts or ideas, you know, some of your resources as we're going along. We want to make this as helpful for everybody on the call as possible. So just starting with the first process, using data across the proposal process, so identifying those best practices for that. So we started off with a company, and this is it's a made up company, though maybe feels real the way we started to describe it. In fact, we made up this company last year and used it for the training last year, and just kind of I keep expanding this company. I keep joking that I need to start this company here, but it's Honeycomb Brewing Company. They're based in Salt Lake City. They're a new Salt Lake City based brewer. The name not only refers to just the honey that they use in the brewing process, but this is true. There's a honeycomb calcite only found in Utah. So it's very specific to their origin. And again, given that honey process, they donate, you know, they try to pay it forward, give back to organizations that are help saving the bee population. And so if you were with us last year, it was started by 2 college roommates about 4 years ago at this point. And again, it's gained a lot of popularity with craft beer aficionados and influencers. But last year, right, they were a new company, new to out of home, and they wanted to make a quote unquote big splash around Sundance Film Festival. And so this year, they've come out with a new line of organic beers. So whole line, Pilsner, Stout, Lager, and still have that honey infused brewing process, but now they're a little bit more experienced with out of home, and they have some big news, and that's what we're going to show you and focus on for the rest of the call, and use that as our kind of baseline for moving forward with the rest of the session. So it all starts with the call. Like I said, hopefully y'all can relate to this and may have even received a similar call like this, maybe even today. So I'm going to have the transcript come up too as we play it.
Hey Piper, hope you're doing well. This is Brian from the Honeycomb Brewing Company calling. So I'm calling to follow up on the campaign we did last year for Sundance. We've had a really great year, and we've actually got a new line of organic beers coming out. So Whole Foods is going to be putting them into a couple stores as a test, mostly in the West and the South, which are some new markets for us. But basically, we want to get a campaign going just to kind of increase some awareness of the new beer, maybe get some better velocity of those moving off the shelves. I think we also want to have like one board in our Salt Lake home market, but we were thinking maybe do something kind of around the start of the summer, maybe the month of June. And we're also thinking it could be interesting to do something that's within a radius of the stores, maybe something like a half mile, so we can get some of that immediate audience. Again, just like last time, we're going to be looking for high impact stuff, maybe some things on buses. If you could try to help us figure out some of the top markets for this, that would be great. Yeah, give me a call back. Let me know what you think. Thanks. Bye.
So hopefully that doesn't seem too far off. Like I said, maybe hopefully it's some things, some key thoughts and points that you may hear from clients a lot. So just want
Piper,
to go back to panel and just hear some of your initial thoughts, your initial observations, hearing this call and when it comes in. You know, what are some things that jump out for you, Piper, if you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think in his call, there's a lot of clues you can hear that kind of guide you to understand kind of what he's looking for, but obviously there's a lot of information missing. I mean, right off the bat, he talks about Whole Foods and organic beers. So, you know, knowing Whole Foods is a very expensive grocery store, that would lead me to think, you know, are we looking at a consumer with a high household income? Even organic beers, you know, is there a specific audience of people who like organic beers? He also says West and South. So what does that mean? Does that mean, are there certain states we want to focus on? Are these in all of the Whole Foods? You know, we definitely like need help narrowing down what West and South markets would be.
Right, right. How about for you, Heather? Like, I know some things popped for you as well when we were going through this.
Yeah, so from a vendor perspective, these are very common things that I will see come up in an RFP. So for instance, increasing awareness. I like to see what that's defined as exactly. Some other things that come to light here are they just want to do the summer. Well, there's a lot of events happening in the summer and holidays. So can we take a look at the time frame there and what that means to the client? And then why the radius? That would be a question that I would have that would come up. A half mile in a place like Salt Lake, you know, any of the Western markets is just really not very far. So we probably want to take a look at a you know, bigger radius.
Yeah, and then as far as kind of the inventory where they mention high impact stuff, but maybe something on buses, it sounds like they're really not sure what they're looking for, but they do say if we could help figure out our top markets, that would be great. That gives us a chance to put our best foot forward if we can help them show why certain markets make more sense. And then you can line it up with inventory or media types that would help your company. You can kind of use that as a selling point. So it really, this kind of request gives us a great opportunity to use research to kind of help identify markets and media types that would make the most sense, you know, to reach this consumer.
Cool. And so we kind of know some stuff, right? You know, just from that initial call, right? We might not know everything or have all the info we want or that would be helpful right now, but maybe at this point, campaign objective, talking about high impact, they definitely mentioned Salt Lake, kind of hinted at top markets, talking about formats, you know, high impact, like what does that mean when we hear that? You know, sometimes that makes us go think about traditional large format, even mentioned transit, June, you know, as Heather said, but there's a lot going on there. So, but there's a lot we need to still fill in and kind of have questions. So there's a lot we don't know. And, you know, just want to kind of talk about that and some of the questions that are coming to your mind. And maybe for those of you kind of out there listening in, any questions that are coming up for you that are, you know, that you may be asking yourself or may think are kind of important things to ask. So, you know, and I know we maybe have touched on some of these already, but any thoughts from you all, Piper or
Yeah.
on some of this stuff? And
yeah. So looking at like the objective of high impact, I mean, I think a lot of us hear this term a lot, and it's really like, what does that mean to the client? Does that mean you just want large, spectacular, big formats? Or, you know, knowing that you need to generate awareness is impact to them, maybe creating like an unmissable blanket of a market, buying multiple formats and creating impact in that market. I'm also knowing like product trial is important. So I think it's like really important to clarify what does impact mean to them. I think a lot of times we hear that and we think, oh, that just means they want like big splashy walls, but that might not necessarily be what they mean by high impact. And then in terms of markets, like top markets, like again, we need a little bit more direction on narrowing that down. And, you know, I would ask them, do you need help narrowing down the markets? Are there markets that, you know, you have good sales in? Are there ones that need some work? You know, what does that mean? Are there markets where you are going to be in Whole Foods and some you are not? So I think, you know, again, that just brings up a lot more questions.
Mhm.
And then in terms of format, you know, there's the high impact again and large format and transit. Like I would definitely ask them if they're open to other formats, because depending on what markets we land on, some of this might not be available, obviously knowing every market is different. and are they open, Heather kind of talked about this. Are you open to more than half a mile, knowing Whole Foods consumers might be, further away? Would you be open to expanding? And knowing, what the role of out of home is really going to play in this, I think is another question I would ask.
You mean like, in comparison to the other potential
other
media
media.
channels that they're using? For sure, for sure. And Heather, I know too, you talked about June, like timing and things like that, and Target. Like, what are your thoughts on any of that?
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind here for me. And one initially is that summertime is typically, it can be sold out, or there can be times where, we are very low on inventory. The other thing with a 4-week campaign is the question that comes to mind, is it enough? And in a goal that is awareness, I would say that we need to look at expanding that time frame. And again, kind of what I said before was, maybe that means getting the Memorial Day and Labor Day holidays on both ends of that and encompassing the summer, being that it's a beer client. And then to go off of that, we're looking at the target. Of course, it's adults 21 plus. But if this is an organic beer sold in a high-end grocery store, we probably also need to look at some other factors there, maybe household income.
Right, yes, yeah. And then I again, like, there was goals, could we infer that and things like that? I mean, Andrew, I know we were talking about this as well too.
Yeah, requests like this really, didn't get a lot of information, but a lot of times we get clients come to us all the time. They're looking, reach 60% of the adults over a certain time period, or they have rating point goals. So again, if you can look for any clues to help you kind of get a sense of how big or how much to propose. No sense of budget, so a lot of times we'll come up with like a low, medium, and high option. Different budgets amount which have different reaches, and the more money you spend, the more people you'll reach. And then any sense of measurement. I mean, this is more beyond Geopath, but it's a kind of measurement that can be incorporated into this proposal, that you can talk about how you're going to measure that the awareness was increased based on the campaign. So in this case, a lot of information on those, but it gives, these are the type of things we look for when coming up with plans for our clients.
Right. And and if there's any other questions that come to mind from anybody out there listening, definitely throw them in the chat, or if it's a specific question to us, put it in the Q&A for us. But one thing that I had, and Andrew, you mentioned it too, right? Obviously we don't know the budget, and I know sometimes it's a sensitive topic, and Piper, like, you got the call essentially, right? So you're having the one to deal with this. Like, how do you go about trying to tease that information or know where to go from that? I'm wondering, I'm betting it's not always that easy, or maybe it is. I don't know, easy of a
It's not always that easy. I think I would ask if they don't have an exact budget in mind, do they have a range? Because if I give them a plan that's $1 million, is that going to scare them? I kind of need to understand, like, what are we working with, even if it is a range. And to Andrew's point, maybe they want to see a low, a medium, a high recommendation. A lot of times, if a client doesn't know what budget they want to spend, we'll say, do you want us to give you our best recommendation? And then we can kind of go from there. And if you need to scale it back, we can do that too. So I definitely would have that conversation and not assume you just build it to whatever you feel like.
Too, like the type of client. So just the way we've set this up, right there, they're still relatively new, small, relatively new to out of home. Like, what's big to them or a lot may not be a lot to others too. So I think a really good point too. Cool. And again, like I said, feel free. I see some chats, some comments in the chat coming in, some really good thoughts too about alcohol restrictions also limit probably availability of inventory, or inventory that you can use. So we have all these questions. Go back to Brian from Honeycomb Brewing, and got some good answers back. So now we can start to move forward. So goal, create awareness, adding in San Francisco, high impact, getting a sense of bulletins, but also street furniture, potentially scheduled fleet if it's in the market. Again, they're talking about 4 weeks, but again, we're pushing, recommending, like Heather suggested, like let's try to encompass this whole summer season, the 21 plus, and again, given their goal, we're looking at reach, and then again, budget. Kind of still couldn't get quite a number, so we're like best recommendation to achieve awareness goal. So let's kind of move forward with that as a thought, and then again, thinking that yes, they want to do post-campaign measurement, but maybe they're not even sure what that is right at this point. So and so we'll use this as our framework for moving forward, but with each of these sections, as we get through, we want to offer some of our thoughts on, potential best practices, guidelines. Again, these are suggestions. Love to hear your all thoughts on them as well. And again, feel free to keep putting them in the chats, and we'll talk about, as we leave each section, we'll have a slide somewhat like this, but I want to talk about these for right now. And again, maybe Piper, you can kick us off, because again, I would imagine these are some of the key conversations you're having when these calls come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of questions that I think are really important to ask a client and to understand what their goals and objectives are, really to put the best media plan forward and to understand, what data do you need to use. So, obviously, what are the goals? In this case, we know, they want to generate awareness and product trial, but a client may want to drive action to do something, or just generate brand awareness and lift. So it's really important to understand that. Asking them if they have a brief, a lot of times we do ask that question, and a lot of times the answer is no, and it's like an email with like some bullet points of here's what we want. I think one thing we tend to do too, if they don't have a brief, is we'll create our own template brief and send it to the client with the important questions on it to try to help them understand kind of the information we need. What other media are being included in the plan? Sometimes, we're part of that conversation and we work very closely with the rest of the media team, but sometimes we don't. So it's important to know, I think, because you can look, are there ways that media can work together? Like, for example, if they're running in social, is there a way to amplify the out of home and social? So I think that's a good thing to ask them. And then how does out of home fit within the media mix? So again, like, what is the role of out of home? Like, are you looking for out of home to just be that big splashy, like buzzworthy format in this media mix? Or are you really looking to generate awareness and do like a lot of heavy lifting? I think it's really important to understand that. Competitor considerations, this is a big one, especially, if you're running in digital out of home, you might need to make sure you're separated from your competition, or a client may want category exclusivity. So, again, that's something I think upfront that's important to ask them. And then brand safety guidelines, you might be working on a very family-friendly brand that doesn't want to be near strip clubs or liquor stores, so that again is important to understand up front, anything you need to be aware of.
Right. And then there's also like was said in the chat, some potentially restrictions given the product as well of geography. And also too, just for everybody in the chat, I've noticed some people have put some comments in the chat. Feel free to chat to everyone so all others can see and kind of have the conversation going on as well, or you can do it directly to us, like I know a couple of people have done so far as well. And so, Heather, for you, I know this is kind of probably a space, this next section is often where you're probably working in kind of functioning sometimes as, the agency, and sometimes as, working with an agency. So you probably straddle the line on both sides of it all too.
Right. And sometimes we will get those direct buy clients or a local client that comes to us directly. Especially with audience and location, I would say that the question or the consideration is if the emphasis is on the audience versus specific locations, does the plan or the set of locations serve the overall goal better than a specific location. So we just look at, okay, does this set of units work better than just selecting something that might be in that radius that they're so set on. I think that, again, we can look at the different audience profiles. Geopath has a lot of options within the program to kind of select some different groups, and that's especially helpful for those direct buy clients. Sometimes the agencies are already pretty set on what they want, or they know what their client needs. As far as the media type selection, we need to go back then to asking those questions about what is the most important delivery method, and those considerations. I would say that, a lot of times in a market like Salt Lake, we'll get an ask for something we simply don't have or we don't offer. And that might be walls or transit for our organization. So we need to find those specific avenues like digital and static bulletins to deliver what the client is asking.
That's a great point. Like, and I hear this a lot just from kind of where I sit. Like say they want transit, but you're not representing the transit. Are you reaching out locally to whoever might be working, have the transit, so you kind of work together in a local market or even, across markets?
Yeah, and a lot of times we'll direct the client to the organization that does handle that. We could handle it, or we could help out. And in that case, we can build the plans together in Geopath with their transit and our bulletins and start delivering to those goals that they're looking for.
And last, metrics and reporting. I know, Andrew, you deal a lot with that day to day. So
Yeah, I always tell our people when we're speaking to clients just to be clear, what impressions are you going to use? When you're in the Geopath Insights Suite, a lot of impressions are spit out. So be clear on your target audience. In this case, we deal with the 21 plus, but to make sure everything's labeled clearly and it's communicated clearly. This isn't 0+, because if Piper gets a bunch of proposals and some have 0+ and some have 18+ and 20, it makes her job harder. So we're able to be clear is my main message. But again, there's a lot of metrics in there. You don't have to give them all out. What's important is it reach and frequencies, rating points, is it cost per thousand? So communicate and be clear in what you're giving. And also, it's down on the list, geography. Depending on the geography you're dealing with, that will change all the numbers. So be clear if you're dealing with the DMA, the CBSA, a certain county, because again, that'll impact everything else. So consistency, clarity, communicate, those are kind of things we're looking for when we're delivering the metrics. And again, back to post-campaign analytics has been taken on more importance than ever. So understanding that and what those expectations are as well.
Great. And we'll definitely come back to some of what you're talking about. Well, to all of what's been discussed, but specifically to some of these metrics, and which ones should you use, or should you use any, or those kinds of thoughts moving forward. So we're all set. We're starting to kind of move towards creating our response to Piper's RFP. And so thinking about audience, right? We talked about 21 plus, but is that the only audience? Is that the best audience? What are some clues and things that have been even communicated in that first call that may help us think about, are there other audiences that might be better than a broad 21 plus audience? And I know, again, Heather, there were some things with even in just this first kind of looking at the call that stood out for you. And I have some other thoughts too as we talk about these as well. But yeah.
I think that, again, going back to a market like Salt Lake, and I'm sure this is true for a lot of markets, is if you're looking at the Whole Foods locations, well, are they potentially in the neighborhood, where your target audience is, or are they on the outliers of those neighborhoods? does your client have to drive to get to that Whole Foods? How far do they have to go? So there's definitely some considerations there. And then from an inventory standpoint, it's, a half mile is really very small. So we really need to look at what's beyond that and how many people are making that purchasing decision within a half mile of getting to that store. They might already be deciding that when they're leaving their homes.
Right. So, Whole Foods, the type of product, the location of, speaking about, the location of inventory and the location of the stores within the market are all considerations of kind of driving what audience or audiences might be helpful. I also was thinking too, right? We have this brand persona, like the essence of the brand, and there's even clues within there too, right? So we're looking at a brand that's maybe a little bit of a hipster brand, so to speak, potentially. So people that are either kind of really into craft beers, or even this idea of like they're social influencers in some way. So there's a couple of clues there as well. And it's just, again, the reason why I bring this up is, again, getting us to maybe step back and think differently about audiences, and have the availability of audiences, because I think Heather mentioned too that the number of available audiences, and again, we've hopefully you've all been in the Insight Suite or in our API, and you see we have many more audiences again. So I think 700 plus and a bunch of various combinations, and all of these right now that I'm showing here are available in the Insight Suite. So again, some alternative audiences to think about. We talked about the product being something that might be maybe for somebody that is maybe at a high household income, or maybe, obviously a different age group, above 21 plus potentially. We have specifics to their consumer behavior. So drink any beer, drink craft beer. And then we have all these Prism Premier segments. So great, bunch of audiences. What does that mean? Like, how do you start to go about narrowing down this and choose, like, should I be considering these audiences? And in other alternatives, and I think Andrew will come on in a second. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But one thing we look at too is guide level, or something to guide us, are the population size. These are national numbers. Just able to pull out of the Insight Suite, and you start to look at, like, are these big enough audiences to really start to kind of go after and try to build into our plan, and that's one thing to start that you can use as a guide to start to think about. You see these top ones, yeah, they're fairly large audiences, right? And you start to look at the Prism segments, and again, people are using them, but they might be on the smaller side. But are there, I just want to put it to the panel a little bit and talk a little bit about kind of what helps you guide and decide on audiences. Andrew, do you have any thoughts on any of that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, we look at all of them. I mean, the demographic section of the Insight Suite has certainly exploded since even when we prepared this a couple of weeks ago. So there's all the different age, gender, ethnicity combinations in there. So we tend to look more at the demographics and the behaviors in the Prism clusters, or the Prism segments. It's probably one of the things I learned from the panel, speaking to Heather and her colleagues, Gina and Lee. They use the Prism clusters, maybe those clients who don't define their audience as 25, 50, 400K. The Prism gives a little more flexibility about their activities and their behaviors. But we're constantly looking at all of them to see, which makes the most sense, using it with other resources to see which audience, would be appropriate for this kind of client. So they're all helpful in picking and helping decide which inventory to select.
Right.
Yeah. And I think for us, from a vendor perspective, it's the budget, and the more granular you get in your audience,
Right.
then you might be looking at needing a bigger budget, or your budget just doesn't align. So if you can look at maybe some overall audiences, if you're just starting out, or just looking into doing out of home.
Right. And I put the Prism audiences in there on purpose I wanted to be able to ask this question too. Like, would you ever use an audience like that? If is it potentially, like, what if it's clustered, like you find that this market has a lot of this audience, potentially. Does that play a role in it at all? Or Piper, I saw you nod your head.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think it could. I mean, you might find that Salt Lake City has a lot of one of these Prism audiences, or you might find that they don't. Or, in helping a client determine what markets, maybe you look at a few different markets and see, are there ones with more of these Prism segments in it? I think it's just interesting, another perspective to look at. You might
Right.
see some differences as opposed to just looking at it by a demographic.
Right. Cool. And also too, wanted to also offer, like, yes, we've talked a lot about Geopath and Geopath's audiences, but we're not the only source, and we don't claim to be, and we want to make sure you all are aware of other sources and other ways to get some of this audience data. And just, again, even just at for the ability to just understand kind of the market and the audiences available. Some of the things we have available for you are obviously the Insight Suite. We also have an Esri Business Analyst tool, where we can create heat maps for you all on different audiences, and we'll show you that in a little bit. But we even, hopefully you're seeing the Kantar reports that we put out there for markets, so you get a sense of kind of who's advertising, and maybe that gives you a sense of the market. We also have e-marketer reports that could help give you some more information as well. So but I know, Andrew, ClearChannel uses a lot of different audiences and a lot of different audience sources, so to speak. So I'd just love to hear from you on some of that stuff.
Yeah, no, we certainly tap into a lot of syndicated research, like an MRI Simmons and Scarborough, which gives us market level detail, so we can really focus in on the market, understand, the beer drinker in a market, and what roads they travel on. So there's a lot of information there. Just mention also the OAAA research that they do, and they've put out 3 great studies in the last couple of months. Good insights there about the alcohol beverage category, which you can then use for finding the target audiences that out of home makes the most impact on. We rely on government data, during to show people back on the road the last couple of years, the Federal Highway Administration. So there's plenty of research out there. Some you have to subscribe to. There's so much research out there now that you can tap into as well. So it really makes our job, communicating to clients easier, to show them why we select certain inventory, why certain markets make more sense.
Right. Yeah. And thank you for bringing up the OAAA too. I just also want to say, like, for our members too, if you reach out to us and we can't answer, Steve Nicklin and I are constantly chatting back and forth. So we're always just trying to help you all find the info you need. And they have a lot of case studies and things like that could be helpful. And we'll always point our members to each other, try to help out however we can with that stuff too. So, Piper, I know for you too, like, you're dealing a lot of times directly with the clients. Do they often come with some data, or what are some of the types that we could, or even if they don't, like, that you can press them for and ask them for, are there certain things like that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's important to ask the client what data they have. I would say that you're probably not always going to get them to share it. But, they might have customer databases where they know, zip codes that their consumers live in. So that's really helpful in terms of trying to choose inventory in those areas. And in-house sales data too. I mean, they might know what markets, what cities, their sales are mostly in, or they may know, where they need help. They also Google Analytics, anything they can share there as well. But that can always be helpful if you can get them to share that kind of information.
Cool. It's always worth the question, right? I guess.
Yeah.
Cool. And so one of the main points behind this section here is really thinking about kind of audience versus just location, and how those two things marry and influence each other. And I mentioned our Esri tool, and we did use this for this next section, and I just want to show you what some of that is, and we'll talk about those slides. So we looked at San Francisco, and we were able to do a heat map of those that have shopped at a Whole Foods in the past 6 months. And Andrew, when you saw this, and any thoughts and observations for you as you're seeing this, and how it may influence kind of the rest of the plan that you're building?
Yeah, this was terrific to see Geopath has this information, so we can really focus on the zip codes where the whole shopper, which zip codes index the highest. So you know, kind of that's where that consumer starts and ends their day. And as we go through this, we'll kind of see how the zip codes that index high relate to not only our inventory, but to where the Whole Foods are located. So you can see there, so these high zip code areas where the Whole Food shopper is, you know, in some cases are right near the Whole Foods or in the same zip code. And then in some cases they're a little bit further away. So it really gives you a sense of, you know, where people are in relation to the Whole Foods. And then, you know, well, then we'll work to see where our inventory index is high. So again, it gives a combination of, you know, residents, where they live, where they're shopping, and what units they're passing. So I think that's a good combination to use as a way to come up with a inventory selection.
And just as an FYI for everybody, that we're sticking to the half-mile radius because we still haven't gotten any different direction from the client. So, and that's going to play a role later. And then I thought it was really interesting, Heather, when we showed you this slide and edited the Whole Foods for you, it felt like how did it feel like? How did it feel when you saw this? You know.
Right. So when I saw this, I kind of, okay, the darker areas, yep, that's in alignment with some of those higher end markets that might come to mind for Whole Foods and this particular client. For instance, the one on the far right there, that's going towards the Park City area. So again, very high end. But then what it also gleans from this is that half mile, clearly people are coming from much farther away to get to these Whole Foods than you'd initially think.
Right, exactly. Cool. And it's always nice, I always feel like, because everybody here on the call, you all bring, like, it's an art and a science, right? You bring an expertise, and hopefully the data just helps support that expertise and gives you the information to you know, the support to do it. Doesn't make the decision for you, it helps inform your decision and helps guide it. And so again, understanding the audience. So how does audience impact inventory selection? So now we're starting to move towards this idea of creating an actual plan and looking at different audiences and trying to understand which is the best inventory to pick to achieve our goals. And so it's really interesting because within this process, I asked, you know, Andrew and Heather to actually go and create plans, and they each took a different route to that. And it's really interesting to hear the thought process and how we kind of end up in the same place in some respects. So and Andrew, you kind of take us through the process you went through.
Yeah, I mean, this is market plan. Again, this was, you know, we use this as a starting point. So not for the units that we're going to select in San Francisco, but this gives you a starting point in terms of if you're looking for, you know, rating point, like I said before, rating point or reach goals of how many units it would take. So this is always like our starting point when we get a request from a client who's kind of looking to see how they can make an impact in the market. Again, this one here, you know, would require probably more than the budget is allowed. But you know, I always say market plan when you're just trying to get started. That's the place to go. You gotta get a target audience. In this case, 21 plus. We decided on and kind of use that as the way to move forward. Yeah, and then I think we went through each example here, and then I think we finally realized with the kind of the budget and the size, we're going to focus on San Francisco County or the city. So we just looked at, like we said in the previous slide, we looked at various audiences to see which of our inventory over-indexed for the various targets. So we looked at 21 plus, you know, we looked at high income, and then we looked at the beer drinker. People drink beer in 3 days. So again, a combination of demographics and behaviors. And then, you know, you can see they're kind of clustered in similar areas, and then we kind of came up, and this was the kind of combination of units that we can then use as our pool of locations to choose the actual units we would propose to the client. But yeah, it's easy just to go through and find the over-indexing units for various target audiences.
I'm always amazed. I always find it really interesting how, like, different audiences just, you know, again, these are over-indexing units for reaching those audiences, just how they show up differently in any market, you know. And this is I feel like this happens very often when you start to look at and map audiences and, you know, in inventory against audience. So and then we did the half-mile radius too, I thought this was interesting as well. Again, if they're sticking to the half mile, while there's a lot of inventory that's great for reaching the audience, there's not a lot in the half mile radius, right?
Yeah, and we hear that a lot, right? The half mile, people may not use out of home as on a regular basis. They think they have to be close to the store. And, we know there's research out there that people travel distances to get to points of location to shop or eat, visit. So, stick with their half mile to show, but then knowing we can go beyond that half mile because we have the justification to explain why these units would make sense for them.
Right. And I think this Marina district, that was one of the high indexing areas for Whole Foods. And it's also, I think that from what I recall, right, the light blue was the consume beer microbrew, I thought it was. So again, that seems like pretty good inventory for what they want to do. But we'll see. And then Heather had a different approach. Again, I'm just knowing, being relatively local and knowing that market really well, was able to take a different approach to it.
Yeah, so as you can see, Salt Lake is pretty spread out. So, and the majority of the Whole Foods and those shoppers kind of fell on that eastern side. So we kind of took a more granular look at the geography and determined there's a lot of units that are within decent proximity to the stores that index pretty high. The initial ask was they wanted a high impact unit in the market. We get that all the time. So typically that's one unit on I-15, a right-hand read. I-15 is the main thoroughfare that runs north to south through Salt Lake. If you remember the heat map, these 2-3 units that are shown don't really overlap with the shoppers at Whole Foods that we showed before. So this is a great visual for a client to go back and say, okay, I know you wanted that high impact, but let's take a look at some other options that are more appropriate for your customers. So we came up with, I think it's seven units that are not only closer to some of the stores, but they also overlap with those areas where we have a lot of Whole Food shoppers.
Right, cool. And again, I always find this very interesting too. Again, you adding that layer of local market knowledge and wanting to kind of have inventory that is on more of the surface streets, as you say, that really kind of is maybe better for the goal.
Right.
Kind of the spirit of the ask, versus the literal ask.
Right. And you do have a lot of people who are local, who live locally, moving about on the surface streets. They may never get to the main thoroughfare. They may never get to I-15. And so it really is important to look at surface streets and as some alternatives in any plan.
Right. Sure. And so again, just want to come down to some high level kind of best practices guidelines and kind of talk about some of the things quickly here that, for you, Heather, and for you, Andrew, like things that you think about and have some of your guidelines.
Yeah, I kind of said it before about marketplace is our place to start with reach goals and rating point goals. So that's the place we start, kind of get how many units we're looking for, and then we kind of use that as our guide to come up with the inventory to fit that number.
Cool.
Yeah, and audience, if it's a beer or alcohol client, of course, adult 21 plus would be a great place to start. And then for most other clients, adults 18 plus is always where we can begin before we start moving on to other alternative options.
Right.
And we get the question all the time, should I be looking for units, that are close to my store location, that reach the certain demo, the behavior? And I say yes. It's really about proximity, demos, and indexing of units for your behavior. So they all can be, it could be one, it could be all, really depends on the client's goals and what they're looking to achieve.
Right.
Yeah, and then kind of as we talked about earlier, the budget can really have an impact on whether or not we're able to get very granular within those audiences.
Right. And, I know oftentimes originally probably Piper, right? The ask was 21 plus, right? Andrew and Heather went off and did some additional research and found out all this great information. what's the best way to share that with you? You know, I know this is a question I feel like is asked a fair amount. So is that stuff you want to hear about, or is it, you know, just stick to the ask, or how, what's the best way to make sure you're seeing what they're seeing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Easy
it yeah, it kind of works both ways, really. It's like, if I have that Esri data that's showing me a heat map where I know there's concentrations of an audience, I think, you know, it's important to share that with a vendor too, to understand what inventory they should be selecting. So, you know, if they have access to other data, I think, you know, work together to understand what that data is and how it can help in your inventory selection. Yeah, you should never be like afraid to have a conversation. Like, if a vendor comes to me and says, hey, I want to look at it this way, would you be open to it? I think, you know, always, you know, have that conversation and be open. Personally, I think it's okay to share additional options, especially if there's reasons why you're doing it. You know, they may have market knowledge that I don't have, and that could come in very handy in a market I don't know very well. And then, you know, just looking at geopath numbers, like, I would always make sure to be very clear on what, you know, impressions they are providing, to make sure it's consistent across all of the proposals you're getting back, you know, making sure everybody's using the same data source, I think is important up front. Sometimes it's something we forget to mention when we RFP, but, you know, I think it's something we should let the vendor know what we're expecting back.
Right, and that's a good segue into our one of our last sections. I know we're getting near the top of the hour, so I think we're tracking pretty good on time. There's a couple more things we definitely want to show you, but you know, we did mention, like, there are a lot of metrics, right? Available in the Insight Suite, and even, I'm sure, among other tools, competitive tools, right? Total impressions, in-market impressions, targeted market. You know, I think this is a great slide, and if you've gone to any of our trainings at the conference, the Monday session, we often do deep dives into this, and we're not gonna have time today to do that. But I just want to talk about the importance of using metrics for people. And, you know, sometimes I hear my clients don't care about it, and that's okay that they might not care about certain metrics. But I would always advocate for using metrics to build a plan, whether or not you share those with the client or you share them and they don't pay attention. If it helps build a better plan, achieves their goals, you know, it just all boats rise. You know, they come back for more out of home. So any thoughts from any of you all on the panel, like, on particular things that you often gravitate towards metrics? There is no one right metric or one magic metric, I get that, but is there anything that for you all that you think about, or you often kind of go to as your starting point or an end point, you know, as you're planning or looking at inventory?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, I mean, you know, for sure, the minimum impressions, but I'm with you, Scott. Even if the clients, if we hear, oh, the client doesn't want to see any of the metrics, well, I would still prepare them, present them, because you don't know if the next media owner, not even an outdoor owner, is coming in and presenting the metrics. So you want to be able to make sure they know how many impressions, what % of the market they're reaching. So I would say we're probably more about the reach, frequency, rating point, and impressions, kind of like the standards that we want to make sure we communicate.
Cool. And like, again, there just is just an eyesore of a slide on purpose, right? Because if you were even trying to present all the metrics, like, it would be really hard to see and to even dig through. And so what we did is we actually created plans, and we wanted to share those with Piper to see which ones, you know, which ones she would pick and why, and talk about that and kind of what guided her decision. And this is the one that, you know, Heather created for Salt Lake, and kind of had two different options here, and we could talk about each, and we kind of mapped the results against the map above. So is there anything, this one, that this was the initial, closest to the initial ask, right?
Right. So this was what they asked for. We came up with 3 high impact bulletins. Obviously the numbers are good. There's nothing wrong with this. From a vendor perspective, what I could see is that finding 3 high impact bulletins available during the summer might be a challenge. And so we might be forced to find an alternative anyway. The other restraints might just be budget. they may not be able to go that far. So that's why we recommended the 5 surface street bulletins and 2 digitals, which actually gets us higher numbers in almost every category, if not all.
Sorry, I'm just gonna.
We're just a little lower on frequency, but that's about it. I mean, we have a higher reach. Our target audience index is higher. Total impressions is higher. So we kind of blow it out of the water with the surface streets and the digitals. So I presented these 2 plans to Piper, and we'll just see what she picks.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, to your point, the metrics are very similar in terms of reach and impressions. But I think what's interesting about the original ask is they were all freeway bulletins. So it really didn't offer the coverage on the surface streets. So I did go with the second option, the surface street bulletin and the digital bulletins. You know, you do get more coverage, and knowing like in Salt Lake City, there is a lot of that target audience spread out throughout the market. I think it's important to look at this alternative option as opposed to the original ask, because it actually does allow you more coverage of the market, and the impressions match up exactly to what your original request was.
Cool. And so we did this for San Francisco as well. And, you know, Andrew had two plans, 3 high impact bulletins, and then kind of a different broken out one. And so I'll show it against the actual map for you if you want to chat.
Yeah, the combination, just rather going with just the 3 bulletins, which we certainly could do, but the reach in here is about 31%. And if we spread it out a little bit amongst other products and kind of hit other areas of the market with some other inventory, we were up to that 57% reach. Again, clients trying to look for awareness. Again, we could talk about why we're reaching, where they live, what units they're passing, but this was a better plan to kind of show them what we were thinking. Hopefully Piper agreed.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think knowing that they want to generate awareness, that reach is really important. And you can see there is a drastic difference between the original ask and what Andrew provided. So yeah, I agree. I would go with the alternative option. And it also gives you, again, more coverage on surface streets. Again, knowing San Francisco, there's a lot of that audience. I think that's the better alternative, which I may not have considered had Andrew not provided that.
Right. Cool. And so just again, ending with a few high level, quick guidelines for anybody. Any want to talk about this one? I mean, I feel like this idea there's no one metric that works for anything, I feel like is really kind of key for us, and something that's been mentioned before. And metrics being used as a more of a check, even if you're not going to share them, they help support the selections, the inventory. And again, the local market knowledge to me really spoke through, like, again, it helps create that ability to support your knowledge, but also an opportunity to educate the client. And Andrew, I know you mentioned this too, other media channels, you don't know what other channels are providing, so might as well share these if they're available to you at all. So I know I spoke to the slide, but are there other thoughts y'all want to add to? I know we're just getting tight on time. So, but there's only one more section left, and I know we're right at the top of the hour, but I did want to just quickly, if we can, if you have time to hold on for a minute or two, talk about this idea of outcome measurement for everybody, and because it is an emerging and important part of what's starting to happen in the industry. And again, something a little bit outside of what Geopath does too, but we do want to be able to support it. But Piper, any thoughts on this for you as you're starting to work with this? And I know, Andrew, you do a fair amount of this as well with a lot of your work with ClearChannel. So.
Yeah, I mean, we always consider this, I think, upfront, and it's important to ask a client, if they want measurement. I think it's definitely something important, especially as we want more dollars spent in out of home to understand how out of home performs. So there's a lot of different options, and obviously it's not going to make sense for every single campaign. You might combine one or two of these together in a measurement plan, but some examples would be brand lift. We use this a lot in terms of like understanding if lift did happen from the campaign. Foot traffic, this is great for like if you're trying to drive someone to a specific location to understand like, did people who see the out of home actually go visit the location? Digital action, if you want them to download something like an app or go to a website, that's another thing we could measure. Viewership, this one's a little bit harder. I do work on some entertainment accounts, and this has been something I think, we've struggled with a little bit, understanding if, you drove viewership to a specific program. But there are lots of partners that are working on improving this measurement. And then purchase, again, if you want someone to take an action and purchase something, that's another thing we could look to measure.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to this is, we hear out of home is not measurable. So even if you or never do any of these tests, it is measurable. And I think the OAAA has case studies on a lot of these types of studies, but it is measurable. And not only did the out of home work, did we get lift, did more people visit, but what kind of insights we get out of it is even better, to learn about out of home the impact of frequency is a positive thing for out of home, and people's travel habits and travel to stores. So measurements is a huge part of the information we provide, and help answer that outdoor is measurable.
And I thought it was also a key thing too that you brought up too, Piper too. You thinking about this or listening for those clues up front, right? It's easier to plan up front than to have to retrofit a plan in there. And
yeah, I think it's always important to talk about it up front, because there are, instances where you may not do that. And then afterwards the client comes back and says, oh, can we figure out how that performed? And it's like, well, that's something we should have established up front, because, it is going to be driven by budget and your campaign. Like, not all campaigns are going to have enough scale to measure. So it's really important to understand like the feasibility before you, before you start a campaign. It's a lot easier just to do it beforehand, and, setting expectations with them. Sometimes they'll be like, oh, we have one bulletin, we want to know how that performs. And you got to set expectations. That's not realistic in terms of measuring. And understanding, like, is this part of a larger, can you be part of a larger multi-channel study? We've worked with digital teams where they've measured out of home and digital together, and out of home and digital separately. And it's interesting to see, how out of home performs compared to other media.
Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody. This brings us to the end. I know we're just a couple minutes over. So, but we did cover a ton, and I hopefully for everybody it was valuable. And just, again, we wanted to leave you with a few key takeaways, and hopefully these kind of came through in what we were talking about. Just the idea of working together up front, right? We're all a team. We're all trying to get more out of home out there. And again, don't be afraid to have the conversations, to ask the questions. Everybody's open and wanting to help, right? And again, while I'm geopath and we're all about data, I do recognize it's an art and a science, right? You all bring an expertise, and it's that balance of the data with your knowledge of the industry, of the market. So, and hopefully, we're here to help kind of amplify that knowledge. And again, I think it's always great to start with audiences and metrics as just as the best practices for starting and creating these winning plans. Like go just beyond the basics of 18 plus and total impressions. So and just kick it back to y'all panel again. Just want to say thank you. Thanks for working with me on the session in Nashville and for this session again. It was really great. And any other thoughts that you all want to add to it before we sign off and say goodbye to everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, I think we've shown the importance of looking at, different ways. Like you might just be used to pulling, adults 18 plus, but you might find some more insights if you dig a little deeper.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to lean on your vendors in the local markets for that knowledge, and ask questions, and like Piper said, just consider some other options, because now we have this data and we can utilize it to really help our clients and customers.
Yeah, and lean on the Geopath team. They're receptive, and geek out is the email address, I think, right?
All right.
Yeah,
Oh,
Huge
right
help.
above. There it is. Yes.
The Geopath team's a huge help to us. So thanks,
Yeah.
Scott and the whole team.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Yes, definitely always reach out to us at geekout@geopath.org. We're happy to help anytime. So, but thank you and thanks to the panel. Want to sign up for our newsletter, take a screenshot of that. That's how you find out about all these great things going on. And just want to say again, thank you and thanks for sticking around for a few extra minutes, everyone. Cheers.